Hey guys, welcome back to the Spruce and Linen channel. I'm Janelle and today I'm going to show you how you can put your weaving onto a stretched canvas. So let's get started. This video is brought to you by the Spruce and Linen shop where you can find weaving looms, kits, tools, and supplies. Link in the description box below. Alright, so I have this piece that I just finished weaving and I want to put it onto this canvas. So this canvas is just one I picked up from Michael's. I painted it with some acrylic paint I had around, and then I wove something that kind of tied in with it. And what I want to do here is just simply put it on to the canvas. Now, I find this process a lot easier when it's still attached to the loom, just because then the strings are all under tension and we can really make sure things are lined up properly. So for me right now, my loom and my canvas are the exact same width, so I'm able to kind of use that as a guide. And then I'm going to just kind of eyeball how far down this should be on the canvas. This isn't exactly in the center, so I'm just kind of like going to use my pencil here as a bit of a measurement to make sure that I'm as centered as I can be with this piece. I created this piece using the cotton rope that I sell in the shop as well as the merino wool yarn, and I used the two different knotting techniques that I teach here on the channel, and I'll put links for them into the description box below for you. Now, there's a couple of different ways you can do this. I do prefer doing this when the weaving is still on the loom because that tension helps keep everything really straight, but it might be a little tricky here because my canvas and my loom are the same size. Whereas if we were working on something that was, I'm just looking around for anything I can show you on. If we were working on something that was smaller than our loom, then we can kind of get it right down onto the canvas, but that's going to be kind of tricky here. So I think I'm going to actually cut this off of the loom before we mark everything. So I'm going to make sure everything is exactly kind of the shape I want it to be. And I'm really squishing all those knots really tightly together so I can make sure that this is going to work properly and look how I want it to. And again, so if you do happen to be working on a canvas that is smaller than your loom and you can kind of get it closer to your warp strings, what you would do is you would go in and you would mark all your warp strings. The reason that's not going to really work is just we have too much space between the canvas and the loom right now, so it's going to be really tight and difficult to mark it all. So I am going to take this off of the loom and mark the strings that way. So we're actually going to be essentially sewing these warp strings right into the canvas. I'm going to cut way at the top here of my loom so I have like a nice long strings to work with. And then I am going to cut at the bottom as well. I don't want any loops for this because they're just going to kind of get in the way. And then we can kind of just lay our piece here. The nice thing about this as well is you really don't have to worry too much about the structure of your weaving because you are attaching it to like an affixed surface. So that's why I was able to do all knotting. I didn't include any tabby in there. I didn't do any twining. I just literally did a bunch of knotting all crammed together there, which is kind of holding pretty well on its own. And then we're going to lay this on our canvas. And so we need to make sure that all these warp strings are not hiding away underneath the piece. And now we can kind of decide where we should put it. So there is the option of putting it straight, but I kind of made all my brush strokes on this canvas at an angle. So I think I want my piece to have more of an angle as well. So we're just kind of gonna eyeball it here to get it where center-ish. You guys know I'm not like super exact. You can kind of measure, yeah, like that, that's looking pretty good. So now the trick is going to be not moving this until we have all the strings marked. As you're marking these strings, you want to make your dots. So we're just going to use a pencil here to make little dots for where each warp string is going to get sewn into the back. And when you're doing this, don't mark it way out here, mark it slightly under the weaving. So I know you won't be able to see this till I'm done now, but I'm just going to mark all the warp strings slightly further in from the weaving, because we want to try to not really see the warp strings, and we want to really make it look like, and it will be, that the weaving is coming out of the canvas. Don't worry too much if you miss a couple of warp strings in your marking, but just try to get as many as you can, and that's going to really be our guide for getting this onto the canvas. All right, so I have them all marked out now, and I'm going to now just slide this up a little bit, and you can start to see, I'm gonna just move this for you so you can see all my different little marks here for where the warp strings are going to go. So I'm gonna put this back on, and now I can literally start sewing in the warp strings. Now I do have 3 that are really close together here, so I'm gonna spread them apart just a little bit. This isn't like, it really doesn't have to be a perfectly exact situation. It'll all work out in the end. And then I'm going to go, see already, I think I have those 2 mixed up, but it's not a big deal. So I'm just gonna go with it. So I'm gonna be working kind of 2 at a time. And be careful not to pull too hard on your warp strings on this whole bottom row until your top ones are also there, because that's gonna make things kind of shift around. So now that I have 2 in, I'm gonna go to the back, and I'm literally just going to tie those 2 strings in a knot, and then you can cut off the excess. And we're literally just gonna continue that process all the way across. I'm gonna show you a couple more, and I might even now move to the top and do the 2 strings that are opposite of the ones we first did, because then we can really pull them a little bit tighter, and then everything will be nice and secure. Definitely using a decently thin warp string for this is a good idea, because it's going to be so much easier to sew into the canvas itself. And I'm using our 4/8 natural cotton warp string that I sell in the shop. And this is just such a good versatile warp string. It's nice and it's not too thin, but it's not too thick, if you know what I mean. It's really easy to work with, and it's perfect for a project like this especially. So now you can see I can kind of pull those a little tighter because our other ones are secure. So I'm gonna turn that over, get my knot tied here. Don't go reaming too tight because it is canvas. You don't want to create any like divots in it or potentially rip it. All right, so I do have a couple in now, so I'm not going to flip it around and tie every one every time I sew them in. What I'm going to do now is sew in all of the strings and then flip it around and start doing all the knotting. So you just do that exact process I just showed you, following your little marks that you have made and sewing those warp strings into the canvas and pulling the ends down into the back. Now that I have all my warp strings sewn back into the canvas, I'm gonna flip it over now and start tying all those knots. So you can see here, we just have a ton of strings, and I'm going to be basically working back and forth just like we did on these first 2 knots, so that I can make sure everything is like as tight as I want it to be. So I'm going to tie those, and then I'm going to move up to here. And now I know that because these strings are the same 2 strings as the one down there, I can really pull quite tight to make sure that everything's going to look good on the front. So I'm just going to flip that over, and that's looking good. So we're just going to continue to knot those up, and you can always be trimming off the excess as you go so they're not in your way. All right, so everything is nicely knotted back here, and if you wanted to, you could absolutely finish off this canvas the way like a painting would often be finished, with like a piece of paper or fabric covering up the back. But this really doesn't look too bad. It's pretty tidy. And then when you flip it up in the front, you can also kind of adjust your strings. If any of your warp strings feel like they're showing a lot, you can kind of pull everything toward those holes to make it look even better. But as you can see, and if I flip it this way, it really looks like it's just coming right out of the canvas as if you wove it on the canvas. All right, you guys, so that is how you can attach your weaving to a stretched canvas. I can't wait to see you guys try this one out. So make sure you tag me on Instagram if you use this tutorial at Spruce and Linen, and you can also use hashtag SL Weaving Club so I can see and share your work. If you like this video, please hit that like button, subscribe, and click the bell to get notifications when I post new videos. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.